Okay, so we are doing a replacement video for the video I forgot to shoot yesterday. So this is a video for the lecture from December 4th. And really what we did was quite simple. We looked at three different types of exchange rate. We have the floating exchange rate, the fixed or pegged exchange rate, and the managed float exchange rate. Everything we've been talking about up until this point has been the floating exchange rate, meaning that a nation just lets the exchange rate change according to international transactions without trying to manipulate it in any way, shape, or form. But sometimes nations think that changing or fixing their exchange rate might be beneficial to their domestic economy. And so that's where fixed and managed float exchange rates come in. Fixed, also called a pegged exchange rate, is when I have a very specific exchange rate in mind that I think will be beneficial to my domestic economy, and then manipulate my currency in order to make that exchange rate happen. And the managed float is where I have sort of these parameters. I have my maximum exchange rate, my minimum exchange rate. I'll let it float inside of those parameters, but in the event that the exchange rate goes up beyond those parameters, that's when I act, oftentimes in concert with other nations, to get it back within the parameters. So let's take a look at why this happens. So why not just do a floating exchange rate all the time? The reason you don't do a floating exchange rate all the time is because when the exchange rate can change willy-nilly just depending on what transactions happen that day, then you can't really track or have certainty in your trade. And businesses hate uncertainty. Uncertainty adds risk to their exchange of exports and imports. And so it can really harm trade if an exchange rate fluctuates dramatically all the time, right? So for example, you won't have to do these conversions, but we'll use this as an example here. Let's say that initially every euro costs $2 or $2 equals 1 euro. So you're an American company, you want to buy 100 million euros worth of cars that you're going to resell for a profit. And so you're planning on spending $200 million based on this initial exchange rate. However, as you're in negotiations for this exchange to import these cars and resell them, the exchange rate changes because of all the other things happening in the economy. Let's say it changes to $3 for 1 euro, or every 1 euro is equal to $3. That means my 100 million euros worth of cars that I was about to buy, same amount of cars, same value, but it's going to cost me 100 million more dollars or $300 million. And so the incentive for exchange when we have this floating exchange rate might go away, might disappear because of the risk involved when I don't really know what to expect from the exchange rate. All right. Second reason is there's also that uncertainty that can diminish your investment. Right. So let's say, use a similar example. We have $3 equals 1 euro, our current exchange rate, or for every 1 euro, it costs 3 American dollars. And let's say you decide you want to invest 100 euros at 10% interest. Well, in a year's time, you're going to get 10 euros in interest. That 10 euros goes into the exchange rate, multiplied by 3, you're going to have a $30 return. But if, as you invest in it and start waiting, maybe you're 5 years for your return on investment, let's say the exchange rate, because it's a flexible or floating exchange rate, let's say it goes down, right? It's now 1 euro equals $1. Or in other words, the American dollar has appreciated relative to the euro, or the euro has depreciated relative to the American dollar. So that 100 euros that I invested at 10% interest, when I get that 10 euros in interest, I jump to the conversion, 10 euros is converted into $10, meaning that I only have a $10 return. So as a result, where's my incentive to invest? If I can't really predict what's going to happen with the exchange rate, why would I participate in buying foreign bonds at all, right? Which could, there's all this added risk involved in it than if I just invested domestically and I know that the exchange rate isn't going to be a factor. All right. The last one is simply it can harm your economy as a whole, or macro instability. If the dollar depreciates because of foreign interactions, then my exports are more attractive. Right? They look cheaper on the international marketplace, and so people increase or people demand more of my exports, so my exports increase. My imports are less attractive because my dollar, American dollar, buys fewer foreign dollars, so imports look more expensive, so I decrease imports. So my net exports is rising, which is expansionary. Well, normally that would be good. In a time where I have an inflationary gap or currently have full employment, this can be very, very bad. This can kick me into hyperinflation if I'm not careful. So sometimes it makes sense to manipulate the exchange rate in order to protect your economy, your domestic economy as a whole. So those are three main reasons most nations don't just let their exchange rate float around. Now, the extreme version of this is called a fixed exchange rate. A fixed exchange rate idea is that we peg an exchange rate. We say, this is exactly where we want to be. So right here, we have our nation, price per pound in dollars, right? And so we say that, hey, we want a fixed rate at $4 per pound. That is the fixed rate we want. Currently, we don't have that exchange rate. Currently, maybe we have $3 per pound, right? Now, because we set that fixed rate, this is where we want to be. This is the optimal exchange rate for our economy. We're going to have to manipulate our currency in order to make that happen, right? So there are a couple of ways to manipulate the currency in order to make this happen. Sorry. Please come to the Welcome Center. I'm doing this after school, if you can't tell. So the first thing I can do to try and manipulate the currency, to shift the curves in order to get at this exchange rate, to get it to $4 rather than $3. Right? A couple of ways I can do it. First, I can manipulate trade. Maybe my dollar is depreciated. I want to appreciate it. So I encourage exports, which I do through subsidizing businesses. They overproduce. What they do with their surplus of goods they produce, they trade it. I discourage imports by creating quotas and tariffs. So exports going up, imports are going down, net exports are rising. When net exports are rising, people are demanding my dollar, which appreciates my currency. So through manipulating my trade, I can actually make something like this happen and get to the desired exchange rate, right? The problem with this is if I'm manipulating my trade, especially when I do quotas and tariffs on another nation, I'm directly harming them and I might cause trade wars. Another way that we can peg an exchange rate or manipulate a currency to fix it is changing the interest rates. We know that interest rates can be changed by changing the supply of the money. That's why I have a picture of the Fed here. Supply of money changes, it impacts interest rates. Of course, it has a domestic impact, but it has an international one as well. So let's say I decrease interest rates. If I decrease interest rates, the bonds that my nation is selling are not as profitable. So fewer foreign investors are going to buy my bonds. Fewer foreign investors are going to invest in my businesses. So there's less inflow to the United States. When there's less inflow, there's lower demand for the United States dollar. When there's lower demand for the dollar, it depreciates. And I can do this the other way as well. I can increase interest rates, making my assets more attractive, which increases inflow, increases demand for the US dollar, and appreciates my currency. So the government can enact these changes in interest rates to try and manipulate the currency. The problem is the interest rates have a very significant impact on domestic investment. So changing interest rates for my currency is also going to have a domestic impact. So I have to balance those things. The final thing that we can do is simply buy and sell currency, right? Every central bank around the world holds a bunch of foreign currency. There's a certain amount in circulation. And so the United States can simply go in and buy a bunch of currency. So government goes in with the US dollar and buys a bunch of foreign currency. In doing so, they supply more US dollars to get that currency. So supply shifting right of the US dollar. And it depreciates our currency. The demand for that foreign currency goes up. So it appreciates their currency. So buying and selling currency can change that supply and demand and get you back to that pegged exchange rate. But remember, whenever we're doing pegged, it's all about acting, right? The government has to act every single day in order to maintain that desired exchange rate through these three metrics. All right, most nations are not willing to spend that much time and effort to peg an exchange rate. So most of them incorporate something called a manage float system. They also recognize that the uncertainty that is associated with a complete floating exchange rate system is bad for their economy. So for the most part, almost every nation in the world has some sort of managed float system. It looks like this. We have a flexible rate until it's problematic. So they create a parameter or a range in which it's okay to let the exchange rate change. But when it goes beyond a certain rate, that's when they step in and try to fix it. So in a crisis, when it goes beyond this range, maybe the top range, I say, hey, I don't want dollars to euros ratio to go above $10 per euro. I don't want that to happen. So if it goes to $11 per euro outside of this range, then I'm going to step in, I'm going to act. Or I don't want it to go any lower than $2 per euro. So if it goes down to $1 per euro, I'm going to step in and I'm going to act. So it's passive, but I keep a close eye on it just in case things get bad, and then I try to fix it. So recently, the euro was released as a currency and it was very volatile. And so they set these parameters for the euro. The euro depreciated in value to the point where it was outside of this range. And then what happened is the G8, which is 8 of the largest economies in the world, all collectively bought euros. And when they bought euros, they depreciated their own currency, but they appreciated the euro currency. So euros became more valuable and they got back within the range that they thought desirable. And they did this using the International Monetary Fund, which is a fund held by the World Bank. All these nations collectively pay into that they can use to manipulate currencies in this way. They do a lot of other things with the IMF. The World Bank and the IMF support or fight world hunger. They help fund international disease research and things of that nature. So they do a lot of good. The pro of this managed float system is that it helps. Things become predictable. We aren't manipulating trade as much as we would in a pegged exchange rate. So there's some freedom there, but also there's stability in the expectations. I know that it's never going to go beyond these parameters as a business, and so I can incorporate that risk into my transactions. Certainty is all the businesses care about when they're talking about investment. The con is if you're outside of this group of people, the G8, and you're not the one that's participating in the collective buying and selling of currencies, then it could really harm you. If you rely heavily on exports, then when all of these nations appreciate a currency, it is absolutely going to depreciate yours, or vice versa, and it can really harm your economy. Right? So it can be harmful to nations that are outside of the G8 because they really don't have much control over what happens with their own exchange rate, especially when 8 of the largest economies in the world are manipulating something in the international economy. Okay, that's it. You're done. In the event that you would like to see some graphs, just let me know. You'll see a couple on the Red Review, and hopefully the examples or explanations, will help you out with those. Really, it's all about, hey, if it's pegged, we have to manipulate it all the time to maintain that desired exchange rate. If it's managed float, you'll have a exchange rate top and an exchange rate bottom, right? Or exchange rate floor and an exchange rate ceiling. And that is what you'll use. And you'll let it operate freely within it, but if it goes beyond those parameters, that's when you step in and act. All right. That's all I have for you. Have a great day.